Guru Nation, welcome to episode 270. We're going right through these episodes, despite me being gone all week last week, so no potty. It was a little light. It was very light on the podcast. Random musings from the Clinical Trials Guru, actually, because I was on vacation in Mexico, but I'm back. I managed to do one video from Mexico. It was a short 2-minute video for YouTube. But this one will go on YouTube as well as the podcast. And I got a lot of questions. Even though I went on vacation, I'm getting questions from viewers, from listeners, asking different things. And I gathered the ones that I think are most interesting. First of all, I try to answer everybody, but I often can't anymore. But I still do. And if I think it's interesting, I'll actually screenshot an email I get or a text I get so that I can remember later to do videos, right? So today I'm going to do two. I'm going to go in through my email grab bag from the last couple weeks. And I have two emails that I want to, I guess, turn into a podcast episode. So hopefully you find some value from it. If not, I don't know. Sorry. But I think there's something in here for everybody. I'll try to keep it entertaining as much as possible. So, okay, the first one, I am getting a promotion. I have an interview coming up. So this was somebody who already has gone through this interview, and this is an old question, so I can't get him or her in trouble. At least I hope not. So I'm going to change a couple of the scenarios around. But basically, he or she works for a big CRO or a hospital or a sponsor. I don't even know. It's not even clear what it is here, but a big organization. And now they're being promoted to study manager or project manager. For this company, I think it's called project manager, for a mid-sized study, phase 3 study. So they were given two scenarios to present to the board to see if this person is the right fit for project manager. So I'm going to go through the two scenarios and give you my opinion of what the correct response would be. A lot of these questions, these situation, task, action, result, interview style questions, these are called STAR questions during interviews. It's a common strategy that employers use in interviews to assess not necessarily what the candidate thinks the right answer is, because in many of these scenarios there are many right answers, and there are many solutions to the STAR questions, but they just want to see your thought process, and they want to see your rationale, and they want to hear what it is, how are you going to solve this problem. Oftentimes they're also asking STAR-based questions, STAR, situation, task, action, result, or situation, task, action, response. It's the same thing. So they'll paint the scenario or the situation, and then what's your task, and then what is your action that you took, and what is the result, or what is the response. So they want to see if you have dealt with similar things in the past. Right. This is how they could quickly tell if you're lying about your experience that you say you have on your CV or not. So let me go through these situations and see what I would do. Right. So as a project manager in a mid-sized phase 2 study, you are told that the compound that is being terminated due to lack of comparative efficacy. Recruitment is complete. Database lock was originally planned for 12 months' time. There are multiple countries involved. What actions would you consider essential in the first instance? What actions would you start in order to bring the study to an early conclusion? So, actually, I apologize. It's a mid-sized phase 3 study. So the study is being terminated due to a lack of efficacy in the study. So it's being terminated early. So the recruitment's already been completed. So there's no need to do a screening hold. All right. When sponsors, in cases like this, where recruitment is not complete, sponsors will immediately issue a screening hold, right? That pisses off a bunch of sites. That's actually part of my response, right, to this star-related question. But it saves money because you don't want, if you already know that the drug doesn't have efficacy, why put more patients in, right? Not only does it waste money, but why waste the patient's time as well, right? They can be taking something that is working for their medical condition. So if recruitment was not complete, I would say stop recruitment, followed by everything else I'm about to say. But the reason they're saying recruitment is complete is they don't want to hear that part of the answer because that's the obvious solution. They want to hear, they want this person to go in depth, and they want to kind of take an X-ray of their thought process. What they want to see the gears moving in this person's head. What would this person do? So recruitment is already complete, right? So no need to worry about screening hold. There are two things you can do. There's a couple ways to go about it. It's a big phase 3 study without knowing much about the budget, without knowing much about future studies that this company, I don't even know if it's a sponsor or a CRO or an academic hospital, without knowing whether they're going to do more studies in the future, it's hard to give my response. However, this is what they want to hear in these interviews, right? They want to hear, okay, what would you do in this case? What would you do in this case? So I'm going to break it down for you right now. If you are a sponsor and you have other studies and you're using key opinion leaders as investigators in your study, key opinion leaders are physicians that have a lot of influence over their peers, which are other physicians. And so you don't want them to be pissed off with you, right? And sites get pissed off when you stop a study right away. Like sites, revenue, you're basically freezing their revenue from future visits. You're going to still pay them for the work that they've done, but whenever you put a screening hold on a site or on a study, you're basically saying, hey, there's no opportunities to make more money on this study going forward, right? Since that's not the case because recruitment's complete, the only revenues that the sites have that you can cut are future visits for the actively enrolled patients. So there's probably a number of actively enrolled patients. Now, the study's being terminated due to lack of efficacy, but for some of those patients, they might be upset. They might be upset because the drug might work for them, right? Drugs work differently on different people. So just because on a macro level it doesn't have efficacy doesn't mean that for a few individuals there is efficacy, right? So you're going to have patients that are upset about being terminated from a study. Even more so, what you're going to have is upset sites, because these sites who have worked really hard to recruit these patients and have these patients enrolled in the study, now you're telling them you got to take them out of the study, right? And so those are the two options. All that was to lead up to the two options that this person has as the first step, which is the decision needs to be made. Should we allow patients who are already in the study to continue the study if they want to? Or do we force all the sites to do early termination visits on all the patients, right? Now, if the study were being terminated due to safety concerns, this would not even be a question. All patients would be early terminated immediately. IP would not be administered anymore. Every patient would be called and told to not take the IP anymore, but to return it back to the site. That's not the case. The case is efficacy. So there's no safety concerns. It's just efficacy. Now, depending on the medical condition, a lack of efficacy might be a safety concern as well, right? So you have that to mess around with as well. You have those variables. But from a sponsor's perspective, if I have sites and I basically give the sites the option, hey, you can continue your patients in the study. Whoever wants to take it, can continue being in the study, or you can early term. It's up to you. Use your discretion as the PI. That's probably the most site-friendly solution, right? The most economically friendly solution is to contact all the sites and tell them, obviously no new screening because recruitment's complete, but all patients that are in the study need to be early terminated immediately, and the investigational product needs to be halted. Patients need to be put back on their standard treatment, right? Standard treatment that's already approved, or referred back to their physicians to be put on treatment. So that would save money. That would piss off sites, unfortunately, but it is part of the business. Sites should know this as well. It's part of doing clinical research. You can have studies, and a negative aspect of all this data that we're using in studies now, real-time data, is sponsors can cancel studies quicker now, right? So sites need to be prepared for this. Things are not always going to stay the same, nor should they, just because you have a site. So that's the thing I would do. Database lock, which was originally planned for 12 months time, that's another thing, right? So if you let the patients continue and leave it up to the sites to determine, okay, we're going to let this patient finish, we're going to make this patient early terminate, you're now extending your database lock. So you're not increasing your budget, but you're extending the timeline for your budget, because guess who has to go do SDV and SDR, source data verification, source data review, is the CRAs. It's costly to send CRAs to sites, right? It is a waste of money and resources to send CRAs out to review data on a drug that they already know doesn't work, right? So that's another reason why, if I were the study manager, I would have all the subjects early terminate, so you could finish that database lock quicker, right? So if you early term all patients and give the sites a hard deadline, all patients need to be early terminated within 2 weeks, then you can do that database lock shortly after the 2 weeks as opposed to 12 months later, right? So that makes it easier as well, and cheaper, or more cost effective to do the database lock after all patients early terminated. Those are the actions I would take. Obviously, after the database lock, after last data is in for all the early term visits, I would have the monitors go and do closeout visits as quickly as possible, and then IRB notification, study closure. So that's probably the route I would go. Although there are some sponsors who, because of the previously mentioned key opinion leaders, or maybe the sponsors plan to do another study on a different indication with that drug, so they don't want these sites to have a bad taste in their mouth from working with this sponsor and refuse to work with them on future studies because of this. So there's consequences to every action and every decision, and this is exactly why they're asking you these things. They want to see your thought process. So I would need more information. Obviously, if I were the one being interviewed, I would have more information. But if it was a hypothetical, I would give them both roadmaps for what they could do, both options. Same email, a second scenario. As the project manager, your study is 4 months behind on recruitment. The total recruitment window was expected to be 9 months, and the study duration was 24 months. What action would you consider to address this, and what other stakeholders would you interact with? So, interesting that this is for a study manager and not a CRAs, because CRAs are sent out to have these conversations with sites, but there's only so much a CRA can do to encourage a site to recruit, right? At the end of the day, if recruitment is 4 months behind already, all right, and the recruitment window was expected to be 9 months, now it's expected to be 13 months, and that's just what it is now, right? 80% of studies, it's in this book behind me, the Comprehensive Guide to Clinical Research. I'm not going to go through it now. Something like 80% of studies are behind on recruitment. So this happens most of the time. 8 out of 10 times, this exact scenario is being faced by a project manager, right? So what do you do? I mean, yeah, you can have the CRAs go out and do booster visits. What I would do, I would bring on add-on sites, also known as rescue sites. So this is why it's important, if you're a sponsor or a CRO, when you're doing feasibilities for studies, you want to have more sites than you are actually going to need, because you want to bring on other sites to be rescue sites for situations just like this. And you want those sites to be initiated and ready to go, but just not given the green light to start screening until a situation like this happens. And then you can call up those add-on sites and say, hey, thank you for being on standby. We are ready to activate you. You've already had your SIV done, your site initiation visit. So now it's time to come on and start screening, and you hope that those sites are able to enroll and pick up the recruitment. Another thing I would do, so I would do that first, all right, because that's way more effective than doing the next thing, which is contacting a central recruitment vendor. There's a handful of them out there. They're not that good. I mean, they're expensive. Yeah, you're going to get leads, but you're paying a lot for the acquisition of a new patient. I'm not going to get into all that, but that would be option number 2, is bringing on a central vendor and doing some kind of central recruitment campaign. A third one, and by the way, if you're in that situation, use me, DSCS. My company will do that. And it's not going to cost that much as these other vendors would. Another thing I would do, a lot of the CROs have already done this, and I don't know how it's actually worked out, but they have nurses, usually it's nurses, hired by the CROs. I know IQVIA was doing this, that they're not the CRAs, right? But they represent sites in a region, and they actually go to the sites. They schedule a time to meet with the sites regularly, usually monthly, and physically talk to the site and strategize, okay, what have you done this month as far as recruitment? Did you go through the database? What were the results? So they kind of keep you accountable. They keep the sites accountable for their recruitment activities, and this is helpful when sites have competing studies, right? The greasy wheel is the one that's going to get greased. So if you have 2 asthma studies and one of the asthma studies is sending a person to the site every month to do recruitment, the site is going to be more focused on dealing with that study, as long as the budgets are relatively similar. So you got to be competitive there. But the sites are going to work with the ones that are noisier, right? So that's another thing I would do, is have these liaisons in different regions go to the sites regularly. That's much better than a booster visit for a CRA. So that's this person's question. I got, or 2 scenarios that they needed help with. I got another question from someone who, it was actually a very nice email I got from them, and I feel bad because I gave like a really short response, but that's because I was in an airport in Mexico waiting to get on my flight. So you know how that goes. Didn't have much time except for like a sentence, but I wanted to do a podcast for this person. So it says, hey Dan, thanks for the book. I'm waiting on it. Thank you very much. I appreciated the comprehensive guide to clinical research. I'm in clinical research for around 10 years now. Recently, I have found a perfect job. Like I never thought it will be possible and not even able to dream about it. Ever since I started working in clinical research, I always felt a bit not good enough because, well, let's be honest, good enough would be only a medical doctor. Okay, again, I'm reading this person's email. I don't agree with everything they say, but okay, so I was always a spare tire and on the back seat. When I found out that job opportunity, I learned that this is my time for education, and experience is just the perfect combination. It is a clinical outcomes assessment position. They are expecting someone really well-rounded and independent, as it is a client-facing role and a consultant position. I don't know how to go through the interview, and I know I will have this chance. I'm just waiting for a date. I'll be honest, I'm very hardworking and got used to be in the background, but maybe not that good in selling myself. I am not a salesman and marketing type of person. Well, guess what? Let me break it. I hate to break it to you, but everybody is a salesperson. You are in sales no matter what it is you do, right? You're a stay-at-home mom, you're in sales. You got to convince your kids to do things. You got to influence your kids to do things. You got a spouse, you got to influence them to do things. You work for a company, or you want to be a consultant, you are a salesperson. So you own a site, you want to be a CRA, you're a salesperson. You're in sales no matter what it is you do. Everything you do in research is sales. Probably the only exception, and this is a stretch even to say this is an exception, is if you're like a hard scientist, like you're the one in the lab looking at molecules and designing drugs. Even then you've got to convince and influence somebody at some point to do something, right? So you're in sales no matter what. So get in the right mindset first before I even continue with this person's email. All right, get in the right mindset first. Let me get back to the email. I would take this work for free just to have a chance to learn it, to be honest. I have worked in various roles, but never in exactly the same position. That's good. That's a good thing. That means you're a generalist, and you should sell that. That's a strong sales point. That's a strong skill to have, to be a generalist. This book teaches you how to be a generalist if you're not already. In clinical research, it pays to be a generalist. It's going to pay to be a generalist. I would take this work for free just to have a chance to learn. I have worked in various roles, but never in exactly this position. I'm going over COA guidelines, and I'm not even sure. Clinical Outcomes Assessment Guidelines from the FDA, so that's what you should be doing, because I know very little about this as well, clinical outcomes assessment, and are mostly about treating certain cases and outcomes for a single patient, but I'm assuming it is different and somehow more specific in clinical trials. They are important while clinical trials are being designed. They expect to have advice in terms of choosing software tools. So they're probably, here's what I would do, and the email goes on further. Let me just read through the rest of the email. Also, I read in some cases sponsors are interested in gathering psychological data. I know what this person's referring to, like suicidality scales and things like that. Everything that I've done is on blood cell results and scans. Patient diaries I've worked on as well. I don't know how I can go about doing this. It would mean the world to me if you could give me some advice. Maybe you know someone who works as a clinical outcome specialist. I don't. I think that's what I replied to the person. This is a very unique position. I searched LinkedIn, but nobody responded. That's not unusual. It takes like 100 emails on LinkedIn to strangers before you get 1 or 2 responses. And there aren't even a lot of these kind of roles. P.S. A video about your keto would be nice to watch. I got to work on that. Yeah, for those longtime followers, I've lost like a bunch of weight in the last year from doing keto. That could be another podcast and blog in and of itself. There's a lot of people doing that. Thinking about playing around with a cookbook maybe with my wife, but that's later. But thank you. I appreciate that. So a lot to unpack here. Let me, and hopefully this person hasn't had this interview yet so that they can use some of these strategies. Let me walk you through some things. So clinical outcomes. Basically, any study is going to have an endpoint, all right? That could be considered a clinical outcome. They check for safety and efficacy. If you're going to be client-facing, you're going to be a sponsor, meaning you're working for this CRO to deal with the sponsors on their clinical outcomes, right? You need to figure out the EDC. You need to figure out the patient diaries or the patient-reported outcomes. Nowadays, they're starting to use things like Alexa. For those of you on video, I'm pointing to my Alexa device, which just woke up right now that I said the name, right? These are ways to capture patient-reported outcomes. There are companies building these kind of tools to capture patient-reported outcomes, right? But there's also other outcomes that are not patient-reported, like Columbia Suicide Severity Scale, which is a scale we use all the time in studies. They assess whether a drug or the placebo causes suicidal ideations, right? These are safety outcomes. There's also economic outcomes. Since taking this drug, do you miss more work or school? Or are you more productive? There are also other kind of health outcomes. How many times do you go to your community physician before taking the study drug and then after being in the study? There's all kinds of outcomes. What you're asking is how to aggregate all these data. So first of all, to figure out what outcomes you even need to look for, it's very easy. You go on clinicaltrials.gov, Anyone can do it. You search any type of indication you want. Asthma, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, hot flashes, pain, whatever you want. You go on there, you search for those kind of studies, study with results. You don't even need to do the results, but just to make it simpler, studies with results, and this will impress the people that are interviewing you. Studies with results, look at what outcomes they measured. What are the primary endpoints? What are the secondary endpoints that they measured? Those are the outcomes, right, that they're measuring. Those are the things that are important to them. Look at what those are. It's going to show you. It's going to actually spell them out. Which ones are used 80% of the time for that indication? That's what should be included in your study if you're helping with study design. Now the question becomes, okay, what tools, what technologies do you use to aggregate this data, right? So there's different kinds of EDC systems on there. There's different kind of patient-reported outcomes. There's different internal tools to use, like SUSAR tracking. I know this company that I almost became a consultant for, Viva Systems. They dominate the space in SUSAR and safety reporting to sponsors, IRBs, but also to the sites and also internally. So those are some of the systems you want to bring in-house if you can for the clinical outcomes specialist position. So hopefully that helps. That's a tough one, but again, I think they're just trying to see your thought process, very similar to the first question I answered. I'm starting to lose my voice on this podcast. I'm rusty, all right? I took a week off from doing these long podcasts, and my voice is going out on me. Hopefully this helps, and hopefully somebody found value from it. Talk to you soon. Thank you very much for listening and watching. I appreciate it. Catch y'all later. Bye-bye.